Welcome the Lord's chosen. History only remembers those who dared to do what no one else could, and it never forgives the ones who failed to stop them. Let that sink in for a moment. Think about it. Every empire that crumbled, every system that shook, every fear that spread like wildfire, it didn't start with a crowd. It started with one person who crossed a line no one before them had the courage to touch. And here's the truth. The reason your name stirs unease, the reason whispers turn into warnings when you walk into the room is because you've stepped into that rare category. You've done the thing others only daydreamed about, but never had the backbone to execute. Psychologists say humans naturally fear what they don't understand. That explains why people aren't just confused by you, they're shaken. Because what you've accomplished doesn't fit in their tiny framework of what's possible. You shifted the rules, tilted the game board, and now the very ones who tried to stop you are secretly terrified. And let's be real, enemies don't lose sleep over average. They don't gather just because someone is playing it safe. They only panic when someone like you comes along, refusing to play by their script. You're living proof that one unexpected move can send generations of patterns crashing down. So if you've ever wondered why your very name carries weight in places you've never even stepped foot in, here's your answer. You did what no one else could, and that's exactly why the enemy fears you now. And don't worry if your enemies are binge-watching you more than Netflix. Take it as a compliment. At least you're giving them a show worth losing sleep over. Number one, you didn't just break chains, you exposed the blacksmith. You didn't just break chains, you exposed the blacksmith. That's a level of defiance most people never reach. Breaking free from bondage is one thing, but going after the hand that forges the bondage is something else entirely. Many before you tried to escape, and some even succeeded for a while, but they always found themselves back in the same cycle because they never understood who or what was keeping the cycle alive. You went deeper. You traced the pain, the limitation, the spiritual warfare, not just to the surface of your life, but back to the source that had been manufacturing the chains for generations. That is what makes you dangerous. The enemy doesn't fear people who simply want to escape. Escapees are common. They run, they hide, they find brief relief, but sooner or later, they're dragged back. The enemy fears the ones who stop running and turn around to confront the very machinery that creates the chains. You exposed the blacksmith, the system, the hidden hands, the silent architects of captivity. And by exposing it, you stripped it of its secret power. That is why your name now carries weight. Because you didn't just free yourself, you revealed the blueprint that had been enslaving others too. The truth is, control has always depended on blindness. People are easier to bind when they don't know what's binding them. You removed the veil. You forced the light onto something that was never supposed to be seen. That's what caused the trembling in your opposition. Because once exposure happens, the spell breaks. A chain loses its intimidation when you know where it comes from and how it's forged. That kind of knowledge can't be undone. What you've done is rare because it requires courage most people don't have. Breaking free is exhausting enough. Few have the strength to investigate the architect behind it, yet you did it. You didn't just fight for survival, you fought for truth. And in doing so, you made it impossible for the old patterns to continue as they did before. That's why the enemy fears you now. Because chains can be replaced. But once the blacksmith has been unmasked, his trade is ruined. You ended more than your own captivity. You exposed the entire operation. Number two, you refused to inherit their limiting blueprint. You refused to inherit their limiting blueprint. That single decision shifted everything. Most people are born into a script that has already been written for them, a silent expectation handed down like family furniture. Traditions, fears, habits, beliefs, and cycles that quietly dictate what's possible and what isn't. For generations, people accepted that script without question. They lived it, passed it on, and thought it was unchangeable. But you broke that expectation. You looked at what was handed to you and had the courage to say, "This stops here." That refusal is what made you different, and that's exactly why you're feared. The truth is, every family, every community, every bloodline carries invisible instructions. Some carry the instruction to stay poor, to stay broken, to stay quiet, to stay dependent, or to never rise beyond a certain level. These blueprints are so subtle that most people don't even realize they're following them. They mistake survival for destiny, but you saw through it. You understood that what was being offered to you wasn't the fullness of your life, but a recycled program designed to keep you contained. And instead of complying, you rejected it completely. That's a revolution. The enemy isn't threatened by people who live inside the pattern, even when they cry out for change. They're still moving on rails set for them long before they were born. But the moment you refused the rails, the moment you chose to carve out a new direction, you became unpredictable. Unpredictability is terrifying to systems of control because it means they can no longer calculate or confine you. You no longer walk in the steps that generations before you took. You stepped off the map entirely. That's why your name carries fear now. Because in refusing to inherit the blueprint, you didn't just free yourself, you also created a new possibility for everyone watching you. You proved that the old instructions weren't law, just limitations dressed up as destiny. And that kind of proof spreads. It sparks courage in others who thought their script was permanent. You're not just living differently. You've destroyed the illusion that there was never a choice. The enemy fears you because you dismantled the very foundation of control, the belief that things must always remain the same. Number 3, you made peace with being misunderstood forever. You made peace with being misunderstood forever. That's a level of freedom most people never taste. The need to be understood is one of the strongest human desires, and for many it becomes a trap. They bend, they shrink, they explain, they over-explain, all in hopes that someone will finally get them. But that need is exactly what keeps people controlled. The enemy counts on it. They know as long as you crave understanding, you can be manipulated with silence, with rejection, or with distorted narratives. But you stepped out of that cage. You decided that being misunderstood is not your burden to carry. That decision alone disarmed one of the most effective weapons ever used against you. When you stopped fighting for validation, you became untouchable. Your life no longer depended on applause, approval, or even agreement. That kind of independence makes people nervous because they can't hold it against you when they twist your story or spread lies. You've already accepted that distortion is part of the price for walking your path. That makes you unstoppable. They can misunderstand you for years, but it doesn't stop you from moving. It doesn't stall your growth. You robbed misunderstanding of its power. This unsettles the enemy because misunderstanding is supposed to break people down. It's supposed to make them retreat, doubt themselves, or compromise just to be accepted. But you flipped the script. You've shown that misunderstanding doesn't have to be a prison. It can actually be freedom. Once you made peace with the fact that many will never see you clearly, you no longer needed their permission to live fully. That's terrifying for anyone who thrives on control because they have no leverage over you anymore. The truth is, only the rarest individuals survive being misunderstood without shrinking. You didn't just survive it, you embraced it. You realized that greatness will never be explained to the satisfaction of small minds. You understood that your path isn't meant to be recognized, only walked. And by living that truth, you broke one of the strongest chains humanity suffers under. That's why your name carries weight now, because you're not defined by how well others interpret you. You are defined by how relentlessly you keep moving, even when no one understands. That is what makes you feared. Number 4, you pulled power from silence they thought would bury you. They thought silence would suffocate you. They believed that stripping away your support, your audience, and your connections would leave you powerless and forgotten. Isolation has been the enemy's favorite tool for centuries because most people collapse under the weight of being unseen and unheard. But instead of shrinking, you did the unthinkable. You transformed that silence into strength. You pulled power from the very thing designed to bury you. In solitude, distractions were stripped away. You weren't being drained by noise, by constant comparison, or by shallow voices demanding your attention. That quiet gave you space to see yourself clearly, to refine your vision, to sharpen your spirit. What they meant as a grave became your training ground. While they assumed you were finished, you were actually building a level of mastery they could never track because no spotlight was there to measure your progress. You emerged stronger, sharper, and more dangerous because no one was prepared for the version of you that silence produced. This unsettled your enemies because they counted on silence to erase you. But when you came back, you didn't just return. You returned with depth, insight, resilience, and strategy that could only have been formed in the shadows. They wanted you broken and hidden. Yet what they really did was create the conditions for your breakthrough. Their plan backfired. That's why they fear you now. Because silence didn't bury you. It revealed you. Solitude didn't break you. It perfected you. The very weapon designed to end you became the furnace that refined you, and the war was already lost the moment they realized isolation didn't weaken you. It transformed you into someone they could never defeat. Number 5, you exposed the illusion of authority. You exposed the illusion of authority. That's not just rebellion, that's revelation. Most people spend their whole lives bowing to titles, fearing positions, and trembling at the sound of power. They assume authority is unshakable simply because it's presented with force, tradition, or ritual. But you didn't buy into the costume. You saw it for what it really was: smoke and mirrors, and once you saw through it, the spell was broken. The truth is, authority is only as strong as the belief people give to it. Entire systems thrive on perception, not substance. People are controlled because they assume control is permanent, but you ripped the mask away. You didn't just resist, you exposed the truth that much of what holds people down is a performance, a carefully constructed illusion meant to look bigger and stronger than it really is. And when one person sees it clearly, it forces everyone else to question what they've been blindly obeying. That is why your presence is feared, because you don't tremble at the same shadows that keep others captive. By exposing the illusion, you didn't just free yourself. You weakened their grip over everyone else who was watching you. Once people realize the emperor has no clothes, no amount of shouting or threatening can restore the illusion. Fear evaporates. Authority loses its bite. That's what makes you dangerous. You didn't just break chains, you broke belief systems. And this is the core of their terror. You proved that real power doesn't come from a position, it comes from truth. They know positions can be inherited, bought, or faked, but truth cannot. The moment you stopped trembling, their structure started crumbling. You exposed their secret weakness, that without fear their power collapses. That's why your name carries weight now. Not because you fought authority head-on like others tried to do, but because you revealed it was hollow in the first place. You didn't play their game, you ruined the stage it was played on. And once an illusion is destroyed, it can never control you again. Number 6, you refused to compete where they wanted you trapped. You refused to compete where they wanted you trapped. That was the turning point. The enemy thrives on dragging people into battles that are already rigged, into arenas where the rules are stacked in their favor. They know that as long as you play by their system, they can keep you exhausted, distracted, and constantly chasing after scraps of victory that were never meant to belong to you. Most people fall for it. They fight endlessly in a cycle designed to drain them dry, but you refused. You looked at the battlefield, saw the manipulation in it, and walked away from the entire setup. That single act of refusal shattered everything. Instead of exhausting yourself in their rigged competition, you built your own arena. You stopped playing by their rules and created a space where their authority, their leverage, and their power simply didn't apply. That's more than just a win. That's a complete erasure of their framework. Because once you step outside of their field, they can no longer control the outcome. They lose the advantage. They lose the illusion of dominance. And what terrifies them most is that your example shows others that the system isn't unbreakable. The truth is, competition within a rigged game is just another form of captivity. It keeps you measuring yourself against false standards, wasting energy on battles that don't matter, and defining yourself by victories that mean nothing in the end. You saw through that. You refuse to waste your greatness in a space designed to keep you small, and instead of trying to beat them in their own game, you change the entire game itself. This is why your name strikes fear now, because your refusal to compete where you were expected to compete destroyed their power at its root. It exposed the fact that their system is only strong if people keep playing along. You broke the illusion that their rules are universal. By creating your own space, your own rhythm, and your own measure of success, you made their entire setup irrelevant. That is what true victory looks like. Not just winning on their field, but making their field meaningless altogether. Number 7, you turned their weapons into lessons. You turned their weapons into lessons. And that's what unraveled them. Every scheme, every trap, every carefully designed attack was meant to break your spirit, to silence your voice, to convince you that you had no place moving forward. But instead of letting those blows destroy you, you studied them. You treated every weapon not as an end, but as a textbook. And slowly, the very things that were supposed to bury you became instruction manuals on how to dismantle the system that sent them. That kind of reversal is rare, and it's the reason they fear you now. The truth is, most people crumble under attack. They take the pain as punishment, as proof they were never strong enough to begin with. That's exactly what the enemy counts on. But you did something different. You turned your wounds into wisdom. You began to recognize patterns in the chaos. You saw how manipulation works, how betrayal operates, how control sustains itself. And instead of falling victim, you became a student of it. Every cut sharpened your discernment. Every setup trained your eyes to spot the trap faster the next time. The enemy can't stand that kind of resilience because it means their strategies no longer work on you. Once a weapon has been studied and understood, it loses its sting. It becomes predictable. And a predictable weapon is a useless one. That's what shook them to their core. The realization that nothing they throw at you can catch you off guard anymore. They armed you with their own attacks, and now you move with insight that can't be taught in safety. But the fear doesn't end there. What terrifies them even more is that you're not just keeping that knowledge for yourself. By walking in it, you become a blueprint for others to follow. You prove that pain can be translated into power, that betrayal can be transformed into strategy, that setbacks can become foundations. Their weapons didn't just fail, they became the very reason you're unstoppable. That's why your name carries weight now, because you didn't just survive the arsenal, you repurposed it. You took what was meant to end you and made it the reason you can never be ended. You robbed their weapons of power, and once a weapon is powerless, the war is already lost. Number 8, you conquered the addiction to comfort. You conquered the addiction to comfort, and that's what sets you apart. Most people measure success by how comfortably they can live, by how many cushions they can pile under themselves, by how little struggle they have to endure. When those comforts are taken away, when the familiar routines, the safety nets, the easy paths vanish, most collapse. They panic, they compromise, they surrender to fear or temptation. But you didn't. You trained yourself to thrive without comfort. You built resilience that doesn't depend on ease, and that's what makes you untouchable. Comfort is a subtle kind of prison. It lulls people into predictability, dependence, and distraction. It softens the mind and the spirit, making even the strongest ambitions pliable under pressure. But you refused to let comfort dictate your boundaries. You embraced struggle, uncertainty, and the raw edges of life. You learned to endure what others flee from, and in that endurance you discovered power. While the world panicked at the absence of ease, you sharpened your focus, honed your instincts, and expanded your capacity to act where others would hesitate. Now you're feared because comfort can no longer manipulate you. Bribes, distractions, flattery, or threats hold no sway. You've built immunity to anything designed to soften your resolve. That makes you unpredictable, unshakable, and impossible to control. Where others are tethered by convenience, you operate freely, guided by purpose rather than pleasure. And that freedom, that refusal to bow to ease, is a kind of power the enemy cannot anticipate or counter. The irony is that most people mistake comfort for security, but true security comes from mastering yourself, not your circumstances. You've proven that you don't need external ease to act decisively or to rise above challenges. You've made yourself resilient in the truest sense, and that resilience is contagious. Those who once assumed they could sway or weaken you now tremble because they realize you can't be moved. That's why your name carries weight now. You didn't just endure the absence of comfort, you transformed it into armor. You conquered what most are addicted to, and in doing so, you became a force that cannot be bribed, distracted, or softened. The enemy understands this instinctively, and that's why they fear you. Number 9, you withstood what others worshipped. You withstood what others worshipped, and that's what made you untouchable. Most people live their lives chasing approval, applause, or status, as if these were the ultimate measures of worth. They bend, compromise, and trade their integrity for the fleeting comfort of recognition. They build their identities around what others will admire or celebrate, and in doing so, they surrender their power without even realizing it. But you refused to play that game. You didn't bow to what the world told you to revere. You recognized that their gods, whether fame, influence, money, or shallow validation, were never gods at all. They were illusions, masks designed to control, to manipulate, and to distract. By refusing to kneel, you exposed a truth that terrifies those who rely on control. Power is meaningless if it cannot command submission. When others worshipped false idols, you stood firm in your own standards. You didn't seek validation because you understood that true strength comes from self-mastery, not from applause or accolades. That independence unsettled everyone who thought they could contain you with the same tricks they used on others. They expected you to fall into the same traps, to bow when pressured, to compromise when flattered, but you shattered that expectation completely. What makes this so dangerous to the enemy is not just your refusal, but what it represents. You became proof that obedience is a choice, not a necessity. By standing your ground, you revealed that their influence, their power, is only as strong as the fear it inspires. And fear has no hold over someone who refuses to bow. The very structures that have held countless others captive lose their authority in the presence of your resolve. Your refusal to worship what others worshipped elevated you. You didn't just survive their systems of control, you exposed them as hollow, impotent, and unworthy of submission. That's why your name is feared now, because you showed that there is a way to exist fully and rise powerfully, without kneeling to the illusions everyone else calls gods. In a world built on compliance, your defiance is unstoppable. Number 10, you built strength in shadows, not spotlight. You built strength in shadows, not spotlight. And that's what made you untouchable. The enemy always expects progress to be visible. They watch for signals, measure influence, and track every move in public arenas, assuming that power grows only where it can be seen. Most people fall right into this trap. They crave recognition, validation, or applause as proof that they're advancing. But you understood that true mastery doesn't require witnesses. You chose the shadows, the silence, the hidden grind where no one could anticipate your evolution. In the darkness, distractions vanish. Criticism fades. The pressure to perform for others disappears. You are free to refine your mind, sharpen your strategy, and develop strength without the burden of expectation. Every step, every lesson, every failure became a secret advantage. While others flaunted minor wins or begged for approval, you were building an unstoppable version of yourself behind the scenes. By the time you emerged, fully formed, the enemy had no map, no warning, and no plan to counter you. What terrifies them most is that your power wasn't televised, tweeted, or announced. It was invisible, intangible, and therefore uncontrollable. They couldn't manipulate it, predict it, or discredit it because they never saw it coming. While they were busy trying to keep up with what they could observe, you were already leagues ahead, growing in ways they didn't think possible. That's the essence of unpredictability. And unpredictability is what turns the strongest systems powerless. By choosing shadows over spotlight, you turned invisibility into advantage. You transformed quiet preparation into dominance. You proved that public approval is irrelevant when private mastery is absolute. And that is why your name now carries weight. The enemy underestimated you because they assumed what is hidden is weak. But strength built in silence is sharper, deeper, and unstoppable. They weren't prepared for the full force of what you became, and they never will be. Number 11, you refuse to be bought by what bought everyone else. You refuse to be bought by what bought everyone else, and that's what makes you untouchable. Money, status, recognition, these are the chains most people willingly wear, thinking they're rewards, when in reality they're tools of control. Entire lineages have been shaped, manipulated, and restrained by the pursuit of these things. People sell pieces of their integrity, compromise their values, and chase validation, all in exchange for what seems like power, influence, or security. But you saw through the illusion. You refused to trade your soul for any of it. That refusal set you apart immediately. While others were enslaved by desire, you operated from a place of freedom. You weren't distracted by applause, blinded by titles, or manipulated by promises of wealth. That made you unpredictable. Systems of control thrive on predictability. They expect everyone to respond to incentives in the same way, but you broke that expectation entirely. You became an anomaly, someone whose actions cannot be calculated, bought, or coerced. What terrifies the enemy most is that your independence exposes the fragility of their methods. They rely on controlling people through what they want, and when someone refuses every bait, their leverage evaporates. You showed that true power doesn't come from acquiring what everyone else chases. It comes from mastering yourself and refusing to be owned by external validation. That kind of strength cannot be bargained with, bribed, or diminished. By walking this path, you became a force that cannot be contained. You didn't just resist temptation. You transformed it into proof of your autonomy. Every attempt to sway you only highlighted how untouchable you are. You operate on your own terms, play by your own rules, and measure success by standards no one else can define. That's why your name is feared, because you are free in a world where most are slaves to what they think they desire. You refused what everyone else clung to, and in doing so, you became something no one can predict, control, or stop. Your independence is your weapon, and it's one the enemy never saw coming. Number 12, you chose truth even when it shattered your world. You chose truth even when it shattered your world, and that's what made you unstoppable. Most people cling to comforting lies, wrapping themselves in illusions just to feel safe, just to avoid the pain of reality. They prefer the convenience of deception, even when it slowly destroys them, because the alternative, facing the raw, unfiltered truth, feels unbearable. But you did something no one else dared. You ripped those lies apart. You refused to soften reality to suit your comfort. You stared it in the face, accepted the wreckage it left behind, and kept moving forward anyway. That choice changed everything. By embracing truth over ease, you built a foundation that cannot be shaken. Lies can manipulate, control, or stall someone temporarily, but truth is permanent. It doesn't bend under pressure, it doesn't decay, and it doesn't surrender to fear. When you decided to walk in truth, even at the cost of comfort, relationships, or status, you became indestructible. You no longer rely on illusions to navigate life, and that makes you unpredictable to anyone who tries to control or intimidate you. The enemy fears this because control thrives on deception. Most people can be manipulated by what they are afraid to see or unwilling to admit. But you, by choosing truth over everything else, removed the lever they thought they had over you. You became a force that cannot be bent, bribed, or swayed because your allegiance is not to convenience or comfort. It is to reality itself. What's even more terrifying to them is that you don't just survive the truth. You grow from it. Every shattered expectation, every broken illusion, every uncomfortable revelation becomes fuel, sharpened into strategy, wisdom, and resilience. You don't hide from reality. You harness it. That is power beyond measure. That's why your name is feared. Because you proved that suffering with truth is far stronger than prospering with lies. You became someone who cannot be deceived, distracted, or defeated. Your enemies may try to manipulate the world around you, but the one thing they cannot touch is your unshakable fidelity to the truth. And that is what makes you unstoppable. Number 13, you are proof that the curse has an expiration date. You are proof that the curse has an expiration date. Generations before you suffered under burdens they were told were eternal, trapped in cycles of limitation, pain, and expectation. They fought, they cried, they endured, and many believed the weight would never lift. But you arrived and shattered that narrative. Your life became evidence that even the darkest chains have a breaking point, that no cycle is unending, and that no pattern is stronger than the courage of the one willing to defy it. The enemy relied on the assumption that their power was timeless, that the struggles they imposed would echo endlessly through the lives of those who came after. But your emergence changed the equation. You demonstrated that endurance has limits only if you let it, and that oppression, no matter how deep-rooted, is always conquerable. Your victories, your growth, your refusal to submit, all of it became a living testament that the curse is not permanent. What terrifies them most is that your defiance rewrites expectation. They thought the cycle would continue indefinitely because no one had previously dared to break it fully. They counted on patterns repeating, on obedience being inherited, on despair becoming tradition. But you refused to be another chapter in their story. You became the ending, the one that proves the narrative they relied on can and must close. By existing as proof, you don't just liberate yourself. You inspire everyone who has been told the same lies for generations. You make the impossible believable. You take what was assumed eternal and show it is finite. The enemy's strategy crumbles the moment their unchangeable reality is confronted by someone who refuses to accept it. That is why your name carries fear. You didn't just survive the weight of the curse, you outlasted it, outsmarted it, and outlived it. You became the closure no one saw coming, the final chapter that proves even the deepest darkness has its limits. You are the living contradiction to what was meant to enslave, and that revelation is far more powerful than any weapon they could have wielded against you. Number 14, you realized fear is their only real weapon. You realized fear is their only real weapon. And that insight changed everything. The enemy doesn't need strength or strategy when they have fear. They rely on intimidation, threats, and shadows to keep people small, controlled, and predictable. Most run from those shadows, trembling at what might be lurking, giving the enemy exactly what they want: compliance, hesitation, and weakness. But you didn't run. You walked straight into it. You confronted every shadow, every threat, every silent attempt to unnerve you, and discovered that it held nothing but emptiness. That realization destroyed their power. Once you saw that fear itself is a tool, not a truth, their strategies lost all effectiveness. Weapons designed to intimidate, traps meant to disorient, and threats built to control became meaningless. Because you no longer gave them energy, you stripped fear of its power by refusing to respond to it the way others do. Where the enemy counted on panic, you brought clarity. Where they counted on hesitation, you brought decisiveness. And when the foundation of their control collapsed, everything built upon it started to crumble as well. The enemy feared people who can't be shaken, but you went further. You understood that the only thing sustaining their influence was your reaction. Once that reaction vanished, their leverage disappeared. You didn't need to fight with force. You dismantled their power with perception and courage. Silence, patience, and refusal to yield became your weapons, sharper than anything they could manufacture. That is why your name is feared now. Because fear is the strongest weapon they possess, and you have made it impotent. You didn't just survive the threat, you neutralized it entirely. You proved that shadows are harmless if you refuse to flee from them, and emptiness is powerless if you don't lend it substance. Their whole system depended on your fear, and the moment you saw through it, their empire of intimidation fell apart. You became untouchable, unstoppable, and beyond their ability to control. Every move you've made, every choice you've embraced has not been ordinary. It has been revolutionary. You didn't just break cycles, expose illusions, or survive what was meant to destroy you. You transformed every obstacle into a weapon, every shadow into a forge, and every lie into a stepping stone. The enemy expected weakness, predictability, and compliance, but instead they encountered mastery, resilience, and clarity. You refused the scripts handed down, dismantled the illusions of authority, turned isolation into strength, and proved that fear, comfort, and temptation have no dominion over you. Your life is proof that limits exist only where we accept them, that oppression has an expiration date, and that truth is far more powerful than deception. You've redefined what it means to be untouchable, unpredictable, and unstoppable. Where others saw walls, you saw opportunity. Where they built traps, you built lessons. Where they relied on control, you relied on your unshakable sense of self. The result is not just victory. It is a complete rewriting of the rules, an erasure of the systems designed to contain you, and a legacy that commands respect, fear, and awe. This is your declaration. You are not to be bargained with, manipulated, or underestimated. You are a force born from silence, sharpened by struggle, and perfected by truth. Your name carries weight because it represents what few dare to achieve: mastery over self, clarity in chaos, and courage in the face of every shadow. If this message ignited something in you, step further into your own power. Subscribe to stay connected to the truths too many are afraid to speak, like to honor the strength within you. Comment and share your journey, because your voice matters in this community of chosen ones. And share this with anyone who needs to be reminded that they too can rise beyond fear, deception, and limitation. You didn't just survive. You became the standard that cannot be broken, the storm that cannot be contained, and the force the enemy will never anticipate. Your story isn't just a journey, it's a revelation. If this message shook something inside you, don't just sit with it. Join the movement. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the truths that others are too afraid to say out loud. Smash the like button if you felt the fire in these words, and drop a comment below. Your voice matters here. Your story matters here. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Because the more light we spread, the less room darkness has to hide. This isn't just content, it's a calling. Be part of it. Stay blessed always.